Okay, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Philosophy for the People. We are joined by Trent Horn, who's been on the show at least 2 or 3 times now. Trent,
Yeah.
it's always a joy talking with you. Thanks for coming on to talk life issues and philosophy of life. It's great to have you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love philosophy and I want to engage more people to be philosophers. I just feel like a lot of people think, well, I can't do philosophy because you need a long beard or you need, I mean,
I'm
Jimmy
out.
Akin can do philosophy.
Right.
Yeah, we're both out on that. Or, you know what I mean? I have to be an intellectual ivory tower, speaking a bunch of jargon and in kind of a highfalutin way. I find honestly the best, especially among modern philosophers. You know what's funny? I feel like you had plain speaking philosophy with Plato,
Right.
and then it kind of disappears and it doesn't really come back until certain people in the 20th century. Like I think for a long time there's this, especially in academics in general,
Mhm.
there's this idea that if you write simply, you're kind of an
You're a
uneducated or
simpleton, right?
you're a
Yeah.
simpleton if you write simply. And that's not true. My
Hmm.
favorite philosophers, past and present, and of course there are Christian authors who can write wonderful things in a simple prose style,
Hmm.
uh, that can get their point across without having to use jargon, that can just be simple in what they're articulating to people. And that's what I love that you're encouraging and that we all need to do.
Well, thanks, Trent. I actually see that as a higher level skill. I think of people like Father Norris Clark is somebody who's obviously philosophically brilliant, but he's also a joy to read.
Right.
Mortimer Adler, Jacques Maritain, yeah, way up there in terms of philosophical chops. But really, I
But
feel
he can
pretty
sit.
comfortable
Yeah,
handing their book to almost anybody.
you
Right.
have
Hmm.
someone like Adler, who's a brilliant guy who can
Right.
just put it out there simply in a book like How to Read a Book, which is
Right.
one of his
Right.
classics.
Yeah, I was just revisiting his Great Ideas book, which is a really good one too. But anyways, so
Yeah,
we're gonna
yeah,
talk. We're gonna talk pro life. I guess we're going to address the best arguments for the pro choice position. Let's get warmed up a little bit, Trent. Before we get into it,
yeah, yeah.
just give us an update. What have you been working on? Anything you want to announce to the audience? What's the life of Trent Horn been like recently?
It's been busy. It
Yeah, I
has
bet.
been busy. My new book, we just got the advanced copies. It's called Devil's Advocate, Confronting My Inner Anti-Catholic. And it is my take on the dialogue book, like the old Kraft dialogue books. But
Right.
it's a dialogue between myself and my inner skeptic or my inner
Hmm.
voice of doubt. So it covers a wide range of apologetics from problem of evil, historicity of the resurrection, Catholic doctrine, moral issues. But it does so, I think, in an interesting way where I pinpoint what I consider to be the most troubling aspects of these
Yeah.
areas of apologetics and how I wrestle with that. So the book gives arguments, but I also hope that it will give people a way of confronting your own doubts
Right.
in a healthy way. So that's been fun. That's coming out. I submitted a book on when Protestants argue like atheists. I'm working on a few other book projects, my own podcast, The Council of Trent. So it's been fun, but I'm keeping busy.
Busy, busy. Well, God bless you. You're doing great work, Trent. So, hey, this is a really important subject. Obviously, we are at a moment in our cultural history where all the life issues are now at the forefront yet again. In fact,
Yes.
I thought we might have had a decision by this episode, but it looks like we have not yet. So, set the stage for us, Trent. How do
Ugh.
you just how are you? Because you've been in pro life work and apologetics for a long time. How does this moment feel to you? I imagine it just is surprising on one hand and
Yeah.
really maybe makes you very optimistic on the other hand. I just like to get your read on it.
I'm nervous. Mostly I'm nervous.
Right.
I have been doing pro-life apologetics for half of my life. So
Yeah.
I really started when I was 18 years old. I sold these memorabilia videos at my school to raise money for a pregnancy center. I did speeches on the issue of abortion. I met the president of Arizona Right to Life, and he got me involved with doing pro life speaking and the work that I'm doing today. So I've been doing it for half my life, so getting close now to 20 years. But I've been mentored by people who have been doing this for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, people who've been doing this even long before Roe
Right.
versus Wade.
Hmm.
So I've run the gamut, and I will be honest with you, a few years ago, when back in 2020, there was an article in America Magazine by William Kavanaugh, And it was saying that Catholics should give up trying to vote for a president who will appoint justices to the Supreme Court that will overturn Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying that, look, essentially he floated the idea that pro-life politicians want to keep abortion legal in a cynical ploy for people to keep voting for them,
Right.
and that they're
Yeah.
never and that they're never actually going to deliver on their promises in that regard. Now, I wrote a reply to Kavanaugh in the Catholic World Report, and I took aim with him because he said, "Oh, it's not because pro-choice politicians want to keep any pro-life justices off the Supreme Court, when it most surely is. When there are justices that seem very likely to be opposed to Roe versus Wade, they pull out everything, even the dirty tricks, to keep them off the court."
We've seen that. Yeah.
So I engaged Kavanaugh on those arguments. But even in that piece, which was written about 2 years ago, right as the pandemic was kicking off, I said the Supreme Court was not a magical thing. I said that really the thing we can most realistically hope for as pro-lifers is to have a court that at least prevents the evils of abortion from being increased.
Yeah.
For example, a few years ago, there was a court case, Nifla versus Becerra, which was a case originating out of California where California was going to mandate that pro-life pregnancy centers advertise for abortions, like
Right.
saying that, look, they're deceiving women with their advertisements, so they need to have a sign that says they don't do abortions. They need to be able to show women where they can go get abortions, which is ridiculous. When I go to Planet Fitness, there isn't a sign there saying this isn't a McDonald's, and here's a McDonald's you can go to if you don't want to go to the
Right.
gym,
Yeah.
to our competitor,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And it made its way to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled 5-4 for the pregnancy centers. But 4 of the justices would have allowed the free speech rights of pregnancy resource centers to be trampled upon.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
even when I wrote that article, I saw, I'm not a super optimistic person, but this is the most where we are standing now, waiting for the Dobbs decision, is
Mm-hmm.
the most optimistic about overturning Roe I've ever been in my entire life. And many
Right.
other people probably feel the same way. But I'm just not a guy who gets my hopes up a lot. So no matter what happens,
Yeah.
the fight for life is going to continue. Even if Roe's overturned, now it's 50 fights at the state level.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And this is why these types of conversations need to continue to happen. So we're going to
Right.
do our best
Yeah.
to treat the matter seriously and address what we consider. There's always a subjective element to the best, objections or the best arguments.
Sure.
But maybe we can take a survey of them. I will say, for people who want to go even further with this, Trent will mention your resources certainly at the end. I have at least 2, maybe 3 quite lengthy podcasts on this topic. I did a 2-parter with Dr. Stephen Napier at Villanova, and we spent a lot of time on personhood arguments and too many thinker types of things. Trent, maybe we could touch on that a little bit. And another one with Gavin Kerr. So this will be a nice little package of pro-life apologetics here. So Trent, start us off. How do you like to present the case for pro-life? And do you break it off into the moral case and the legal case? You like to kind of bundle it all together? What's your approach these days for getting the conversation started? Mm-hmm.
Well, when I am with people or when I'm engaging people who identify as pro-choice,
Mm-hmm.
I try to figure out where they're at on the issue. There's really 3 types of arguments that are used to defend legal abortion. There are arguments that assume the unborn are not human beings. It just bypasses that question entirely, like saying abortion needs to be legal for choice or privacy or for people who are very poor. That just assumes the unborn are not human beings. It just completely bypasses the question.
Yeah.
The other type would be arguments that attempt to argue the unborn are not human beings by saying the unborn have a difference between you and I, so they're not persons, and so abortion should remain legal. Or there are arguments that admit that the unborn are not human beings. And so they say, even if the unborn is a human being, pregnant women do not have an obligation to sustain them through pregnancy. Therefore, abortion is permitted, much in the same way that you are free to not donate a kidney to save my life if I require a kidney or something like that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I try to figure out where they're at. Are they merely assuming the unborn are not human? And then I'm going to redirect them. And I might say, well, we don't kill 2-year-olds because they live in poverty. Why would we kill unborn children if they're equally human? So I'll redirect, get it back to that one question. If they say the unborn are not human beings, I'm going to ask them, what is a human being or what is a person? And if they admit they're human beings but still try to defend abortion, I will try to find a problem in their argument by analogy from things like organ donation, things like that.
Yeah, excellent. Where would you classify people? And this is a position I'll want to talk about at least later on in
Mhm.
the conversation, who will essentially grant most of the pro-life case, but then still say, given the type of society we live in, a liberal society, we should still make abortion legal because. So they'll grant it's a person, they'll grant it's a human, they'll grant that it's killing them, right? But then they have
Right.
another class of arguments of why we should still make this at least legally permissible, even if they're willing to grant pretty much everything that, let's say on the popular level, most pro-choice
Right.
people do not want to grant. Right.
Yeah, it would depend if they are. I would try to see either if they fall into the classic bodily autonomy argument by saying that, yes, it's a person, but because pregnancy is in a different context than most other relationships, abortion can be permitted where we don't do acts of similar violence amongst other people. We don't permit them. Or if they're just being inconsistent, they just say, well, people disagree. We have to promote pluralism and liberalism. And so, people, it's like the mystery passage in Casey versus Planned Parenthood,
Right.
which said that freedom means the ability to define for oneself the meaning of life and the mystery of the universe. And it is just a bunch of new age hooey and nonsense. And freedom does mean you're free to believe whatever you want about life or the universe. If you want to believe the earth is on a turtle and it's on another turtle and it's turtles all the way down, you can believe whatever you want. But as the leaked Dobbs decision showed, Justice Alito said, you're not free to act on your beliefs as if they are true.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of not nice people, gross people on the internet who would want to lower the age of consent for sexual conduct to something that's obscenely low that would justify something like pedophilia. Now, they're free to have their gross, awful beliefs inside of their heads. They're free to believe these gross things as long as it stays in between their ears and doesn't go anywhere else. Okay. But they're not free to act on that belief, mistaken belief about when sexual conduct is permissible and go out and rape children. Okay.
Right. Right.
So, much the same way, people are free to believe in infanticide. You've got people like Peter Singer and others and Michael Tooley and others who argue that, well, maybe infanticide should be permitted after birth. There's another article in the Oxford Journal it was the Oxford Journal of Medicine, I think, that it was published by, I think it was Jublini and Minerva, and they called it after birth abortion.
Mhm.
Okay. And I think they're free to argue for the permissibility of infanticide. And then we can debate about whether it'd be better to live in a society where evil opinions are illegal. That's the integralist thesis. That's a different question.
Sure.
But I understand I'm not going to throw somebody in jail because they wrote an awful piece defending infanticide. You're free to believe such a gross, terrible, perverted idea. You're
Mhm.
not free to act on it. You're not free to act on it and go try to do that because we as a society recognize infants have a right to life.
Right.
And so it just doesn't make sense to me if someone says, "Oh, well, yeah, the unborn is a person and this and that," but we live in a liberal society and so freedom. You don't use that to justify other offenses against human beings. It would be inconsistent to only do it in this case.
Trent, do you think related to that, before we start getting into some of these deeper considerations, that there's something like a Pascal's wager to either offer up before or after you present a pro-life
Mm,
position? I mean, saying something like, look, historically, humans have a pretty bad track record of whenever they sort of denied personhood to persons, right? Like we've got
right.
a pretty bad track record on that. Like that's usually the losing team, morally speaking, right? Also, if the pro-life position is right, here is what you're promoting, right? Which
Right.
is in incalculable evil, right?
Right.
Whereas if the pro-life position is wrong, yeah, there's probably some harm done by them, granted. But if we weigh up the cost of being right versus the cost of being wrong for each position, and we look at the historical track record, right? If
Right.
you're agnostic, like if you're on the fence, it seems like there's probably a rational position to lean into. What do you think about something like that?
I think an argument like that can have a supplemental effect.
Yeah.
So I see it as more to be persuasive, something you would add on to a logical argument where you try to root a person's intuitions into how they value human beings. What does the right to life mean? I think it's a way to show aspects of the burden of proof, for example, that the burden isn't necessarily on pro-life advocates to show the unborn are human. If someone's going to take the lives of these individuals, they should be able to tell us what they are and why they are not valuable, why they're not persons. One who says the unborn is not a person, they must know what a person is to disqualify him or her. So
Right.
I would start with the more solid arguments and then say, look, also keep in mind the past failures that have been systematic in denying personhood and the gravity of what would happen if we got this wrong. I wouldn't necessarily lead with this argument because I could see someone saying, look, what about the wrongness of factory farming or killing animals? You know, if the animal rights people are wrong, then that just means many people are inconvenienced. They don't get to eat meat. But if you're wrong, you're committing very, very bad evils against animals. Now, I don't find that to be a persuasive initial argument. I want to hear an argument about why animals would have a right to life or why factory farming or things
Right.
like that would be unjustifiable. And then I could see them putting this forward to, at the very least, it makes me want to take their argument seriously. And I do take it seriously, but I'm not convinced by it. I think pro-lifers would use a similar Pascalian wager as a similar way to either take the pro-life position seriously or to be a persuasive element to it, but I would be hesitant to make it a major argument.
Right. Yeah. Not something you should rely on. But I think it's certainly always important for one, I think just to be able to say, this is how I know that I am wrong if I am wrong. But also, what would it mean if I were
Right.
wrong? I think that's an important question to
I
ask.
do
And I
think,
agree with animal
yeah,
ethics. That is an important question to ask with that. Right. Yeah.
yeah, I do think though that putting the question in this way, it does help people to get off the fence because many people will want to say, well, people will tell me on abortion, you know what, maybe we should just agree to disagree. And then I tell them, I don't agree to that. Because when you say, let's agree to disagree, you're saying, let's keep the status quo. Let's not change anything. That's just asking me to give up. That's asking me to act like I'm wrong and the prevailing state of
Right.
things is correct. So that's not something that I'm prepared to do. That I would say that there's no neutral ground on this position. You either have to say the unborn are not human beings with a right to life and a right to reside in their mother's body, or they are human beings with a right to reside in their mother's body. You've got to pick and defend one of those. You can't just be in kind of a neutral position on this issue. And to show, look, either one side or another is right. And depending on which side is right, there are grave evils. There's either denying women rights over their bodies or killing millions of human beings every year. And there is no middle ground. So if you put it this way, it can also be used to force people to take a position and to act.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Okay, let's start diving in. Let's start with personhood arguments. That seems certainly relevant, right? So one way that the pro-choice position will advance itself is it will grant, hey, yeah, we shouldn't kill persons, right? That is immoral. But here's the thing: what we're killing here actually isn't a person because of these reasons, which Trent, you'll help us articulate and see why they don't hold up, if you don't mind.
Yeah, a lot of philosophers, and when they'll say we try to identify a particular class, you know, what is the definition behind that class? Usually, we'll put forward a lot of examples that will fall under it, and we try to figure out, well, what is the common thing that these things have? So we might say, for example, what is a bird, and we'll throw out all the different types of birds that we're aware of and what is the common thread that runs through all of them. And you might be tempted to say it's the ability to fly, but there are birds that cannot fly. But so then it's not that, it's actually, you know, like ostriches are birds, for examples, or kiwis. Rather, it is having a particular wing structure, uh, you know, that might be ordered towards flight in some way, even if it's not actualized, or even just ordered towards having wings is what makes you a bird. Things like that. And so that's important. You don't want to be premature and say, what makes a bird is that it can fly, because you say, well, you're going to disqualify this group that clearly are birds. And so something similar happens with the issue of persons. Many pro-choice advocates will say, well, when I say what a person is, what do we all agree? Uncontroversial examples of persons. I'm a person, you're a person. Then they'll say things like, well, what if we met a very intelligent alien like Spock from Star Trek? Now, he's half human. Or Superman, he's Kryptonian. He's not human at all. uh, what you know, what do all persons have in common? And what they'll say is it's not just being a biological human, because we might meet a fictional alien, things like that. Christians believe that angels are persons. They're just they're persons without bodies.
Right.
So then we would say, okay, the pro-choice advocate may say, notice everything that we're picking here. We are picking, and we also say what are not persons. Rocks aren't persons. Trees aren't persons. Many people will say that rats are not persons, things like that. What is the common thread that persons have but non-persons do not? And I think that many pro-choice advocates will say that the common thread is that persons can engage in rational thought, in self-reflection. They're conscious of the outside world. They have consciousness. Non-persons don't have these things. So then they'll say, all right, let's look at the disputed areas. Well, look at an unborn child, a human fetus. It's not at least prior to 20 weeks after fertilization. Just take a first trimester embryo or fetus. You would say, well, it is not a person. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have self-reflective thoughts like these other uncontroversial examples of persons. And they'll do that, and I think that that argument only succeeds if you keep out other important cases we have to account for. What about someone who is asleep? What about someone in a reversible coma, that we put them in a medical coma to prevent brain injury? They can't act like a person. What about infants? They do not have these rational capacities beyond what a rat can do.
Right.
And this is a dispute that I had with Nathan Nobis about cognitive abilities and personhood. I mean, most people agree rats are not persons. You shouldn't be cruel to rats. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with fumigating a building to kill rats because they are pests. Yet rats are cognitively superior to infants, human infants. They can navigate a maze, for example, and remember things to perform tasks, but they're not persons. Yet infants are certainly below that cognitive level, but they are persons. So I would say that that shows that personhood is not tied to your current abilities. It is tied to membership in a class that is ordered towards certain rational ends. And it's
Right.
that membership in that, what I would call a rational kind.
Mhm.
That is what makes you a person. That is why you, me, Superman, an infant, an unborn baby are persons, but rats, rocks, uh, pigs, uh, black holes, these are not persons.
Black holes, yeah. So, when all right, so obviously I agree with all that. Trent, how much do you think the pro-life case depends on something like an essentialism? Is that bound up with now? At the end of the day, I don't think that would be a terrible thing because I'm an
Right.
essentialist. I think it's true, right? I think you're a person in virtue of what you are, your essence, right? Not in virtue of
Right.
what you're currently doing. That's the other position, right?
Yeah.
But what you described to me does seem to be an essentialist position, which I would argue is the common sense position as well, ultimately. But do
Right.
you
So
think these
this is
things
the
have to
idea.
come together as a package deal here? Mhm. Or
Not
do you think the case could be made
necessarily.
apart from essentialism? Mhm.
It could be,
Mhm.
depending what you mean by pro-life. So the idea of essentialism being that we can understand certain things, and this is somewhat related to the concept of universals. That would be, the idea that some things, uh, there are not just a large number of different objects that are in the world, but things can be categorized and grouped because they have certain essences that they participate in, or they have essential properties that if you take those properties away, the thing no longer exists.
Right.
And so when we look to examples of things like persons, though what's funny is I feel like the pro-choice position is also engaged in a kind of essentialism when it ties personhood to having certain. It just says you have to have immediate rational faculties, or at least they say they have to be somewhat immediate. I think many of them would say if you're in a reversible coma, you're still a person because you have those abilities, even if you can't presently exercise them until we get you out of the coma. But what if someone is a person and we put them, they're injured, and so their brain is injured, and so they can't function like a person anymore, but we give them a drug that will regrow their brain, and they'll have their old memories and abilities back. They just have to go through a process of development. Well, I think a lot of people would say that they're still a person, and I would say, oh, but they only have that capacity to act like a person that has to grow and develop. But that's the same for the unborn. So I think the other side does engage in this as well. But I do believe that you can engage in an argument for the pro-life position. There are other arguments. If you check my debate with Nathan Nobis at Emory University,
Mhm.
I actually presented 5 arguments for the pro-life position, only one of which dealt with anything that would resemble kind of essentialism per se. For example, Don Marquis has the future like ours argument. It just
Yeah, I
asks
was
the
going to bring
question.
that one up, by the way.
Yeah, it just
Mhm.
asks the question, why is killing wrong? And it seems like the reason it's wrong to kill you, me, or an infant, but not a rat, is because you, me, and an infant have a property called a future like ours. Even if we're not persons, whatever the heck that means, we have something that is we have a future like ours. That killing is wrong because it steals your
Takes
future.
that
It
away,
deprives,
right? Mhm.
yeah, it deprives you of your future. That is what makes killing wrong. Not necessarily that causes pain, because you can, painlessly kill someone and it's still wrong.
Mhm.
It deprives you of a future of valuable experiences. And that's true for nearly all unborn children as well, except maybe for those with the terminal condition like anencephaly. So the Marquis argument, I think it would show the vast majority of abortions are wrong. It may not show that it's wrong to kill someone who has a terminal illness, for example. But I do think that you can make an argument from that, and then there's other arguments that are made. But that would just be one example. I do think there are multiple lines of evidence you can present for the pro-life thesis.
Now, what do you think of arguments? One that immediately springs to mind would be Proust's "I was once a fetus." I'm sure you're familiar with that one, right?
Yes.
Or these too many thinker type arguments
Yeah.
against, really against the personhood type arguments that pro-choicers put out there. Do you have any of those that you like to develop
Well, I think that they're
use?
fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I did offer Proust's argument in my debate with Nobis as one of the philosophical arguments for the pro-life position. And so Proust's argument is one that is based not necessarily on personhood or essentialism, but it's based on the concept of personal identity.
Hmm.
Now, I don't think that it necessarily, if you're queasy about making a pro life argument because it relies on essentialism or essences,
Hmm.
uh, you still have similar metaphysical baggage in Proust's argument, because Proust's argument relies on a metaphysical thesis called animalism. And that would be the idea that my personal identity, what am I? And that would be the claim that I am essentially, I am an animal. I am an embodied organism. And so this is an argument, doesn't rely on saying, here's a definition of a person who fits the definition here or there. It just starts with the self-evident proposition, well, I'm alive and I have a right to life, and it's wrong to kill me. And now I just got to figure out what I am. Okay, well, am I just a mind? Well, and then that's where the animalist, I know it's a weird term for people.
The
It doesn't
mind that
mean,
came on top of Bob, which was the fetus, right? Yeah.
right, yeah. What am I? Okay, am I just a mind? Because then that might be called mentalism. We
Hmm.
could say that that's the competing view. So am I an organism that has mental abilities? Or am I a mind that came into existence inside of a pre-existing organism, a body that I inhabit, but I am not the body itself? So you might have animalism versus mentalism.
Sure. Hmm.
What better accounts for our intuitions? Now, most people will say, we'll speak about our bodies as not really being something we have; it's something we are. I don't kiss my wife's forehead.
That's why we don't think of rape as a property crime.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I kissed my wife on the forehead. And this came up in my debate with Nobis. He said, Trent was saying rape's not a serious crime. I said, no, I did say it's serious. But my point is that if we are minds, and this is a point that people can lose, and we're very deliberate about this.
Hmm.
If we are only minds, then you cannot rape a person. Okay. I'm not saying you can, it's permissible. What I'm saying is it would be metaphysically impossible, because rape, by definition, is unlawful, non consensual intercourse with another person. And intercourse can be defined as, sexual penetration by the penis into the vagina. Okay. So the definitions that I'm involved in what rape is, these seem to be an act you can only do against a body. Okay. But we don't say that Bob raped Mary's body. We
Right.
say Bob raped Mary. Okay. We speak about that this is a crime against a person because we are bodies. Now, I know that's a highly emotional example we put forward, but there's other examples that people give. Eric Olson defends the animalist thesis. And we get these things like the too many thinkers arguments and others.
Well,
That
just
we would
Trent, real
say,
quick, I want to just highlight something
yeah, sure,
that I
sure.
think is really important. Is like, look, every argument, right, comes with certain assumptions, and
Yes.
most people, almost everybody, cannot defend every assumption, nor should they be expected to defend every assumption. So the best you can do most of the time, whether it's arguments
Sure.
for life or God, is say, from this nest of assumptions, which I think are really safe and reasonable,
Right.
these are the conclusions that you get. Now, you can go after those assumptions if you want. You can go after essentialism, and fine, we'll do that. I'm ready to defend those assumptions. But these are common sense assumptions. And if
There's
you
no
get
reason to doubt them on the face of it.
right, and it's even stronger if you just take, okay, put essentialism aside. Here's another relatively safe assumption, say Proust's metaphysics of identity.
Right.
Get the same conclusion. Here's another relatively safe assumption. Get the same conclusion, or at least most of the conclusion. Maybe with the marquee one, you have to have different considerations, right?
But we get nearly all of it.
Yeah, but to my mind, like, dang, the pro-life position can launch from a lot of really safe starting points, right? And I just wanted to highlight that, right? That's something that I think needs to be emphasized. And to start even angling in with pro-choice, I mean, look, friends, you're going to have your own assumptions on that, and they're going to be far more not just controversial, but controverted than any of the pro-life assumptions.
Well, what's interesting, what I wanted to, I think that's correct. It's neat. You can start from these different areas of thought and assumptions, and you arrive at nearly the same conclusion. That convergence, I think, speaks well to the truth of the pro-life position. But this, leaving aside the example I gave, which could be volatile to some people, another argument is saying, look, there is a thinking animal talking to you. There's a thinking animal in front of this screen. So there's someone who is doing animal things, expelling air, talking. You say, yeah, both of us, right? We're expelling air, we're talking, we're looking, we're recognizing. We seem to be doing many things that animals do. But that same being also seems to be thinking. So the question is, am I that thinking animal? That seems to me like a very safe assumption to be making, that there is a thinking animal here. There's two thinking animals in this interview, and I am one of them, and you're the other one. And so that would mean that I am not merely a collection of thoughts. Another way I might look at it is, okay, if I am a mind, if I'm a mind, where am I? You might say that if I exist, then I occupy some point in space. You could locate me. Like, could you say that I exist if it was impossible to locate me anywhere in the universe? Now, setting aside souls and persistence, things like that, blah, blah, blah. Well, we'll come back to that here in a second. Most people would say, well, no, that would be strange to say you exist, but you don't occupy any space or location. And yet, if I'm in a deep sleep or I'm not thinking, there's my body. I'm not engaged in rational thought. Where am I? Did I stop existing and during a night of deep sleep? Like where am I? You're in your brain. Well, what part of it? Where am I? It seems to be an odd thing that comes about. Though that does, I don't want to go too much on a tangent here, but this does, some people may think that I am saying that we are only our bodies or that our soul is trapped in our body. I'm not saying that. The Christian view is that we are a composite of soul and body.
Right.
Now, there is a bit of a debate in the philosophy of religion about the question of when you die and your soul, let's say you die and your soul goes to heaven waiting for the resurrection of the body. All right. Did you survive that process?
We just had a discussion on corruptionism on this channel like
you
3
did.
or 4 weeks ago. Yeah.
You did. Where do you
I myself am legitimately agnostic on this question.
Really?
Jim Madden, he leans towards corruptionism. And we had Chris Tomaszewski on, whose whole doctoral dissertation is arguing for corruptionism. So
Oh, really? Yeah, that is interesting. So for me, I lean strongly corruptionism.
Hmm.
And that'd be the idea that I would say that when you die, you stop existing. And what exists is your body and your soul in two
Hmm.
separate locations. And that when they are reunited, you begin to exist again. So I'm not like an apologist for that view, but I am I lean very strongly
Yeah.
to that view. And that I really do believe that if you say you continue to exist after death, like you exist, I really worry that basically turns your identity into your soul, which wouldn't necessarily even be a problem for the pro-life position because there's a strong case to be made that you have a soul from the moment of conception because the soul is the principle of life. But I worry it could feed into this idea that who you are is a mind, and only when your mind comes into existence do you come into existence. I worry it could feed into that a little
Right.
bit.
Yeah, you'll start hanging out with Richard Swinburne at that point.
Richard
Yeah.
Swinburne. Well, what am I? I am a mind. I'm a mind that could imagine what is God. Well, it's not too hard to imagine. You just
Not too difficult.
imagine you're looking in a mirror and you no longer see yourself, but you could see many things at once, probably, and then you can see all things, and before you know it, you're God. I'm like, okay.
I'm pretty sure we actually did this Swinburne imitation in our last
I
conversation.
it's such a great
You
one
do
to
it very well. You do.
it,
Now, look, I love his work. I disagree with him on a number of things, but he is absolutely convinced of substance dualism. Last I heard. So,
yeah.
anyways, not to get too far afield.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
sure.
you've said a lot in response to the different call them personhood arguments. Is there anything else you want to say about this sort of class of argument or objection before we turn to something else, Trent? Hmm.
No, I think that they're really not as popular among a lot of philosophers who defend abortion because you really have to own uh, a repugnant conclusion if you're going to push them to their limits. I think the personhood argument, i- you either have to embrace infanticide or be a radical animal rights activist. I think that it will lead you to one of those conclusions that either a person is anything that can feel, which
Hmm.
would mean so many animals are persons, or it's a being that has rational abilities immediately, which would
Yeah.
exclude infants. And if you try to hedge it to say it includes things that are ordered towards a rational end, you're going to get a human embryo and fetus in that class very quickly.
Right. Yeah. That's right. That sounds absolutely right. And again, it fits well with our intuitions, our basic understanding. Before you're mired in sophistry, is that when my wife, who's pregnant right now, she is pregnant with an actual person with potentials,
Right.
not a potential person that has yet to actually become one, and that is
Right.
the legitimate difference, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I said we wanted to consider what we feel are the best and strongest. Obviously, there's a whole host of objections out there that we're just not even going to pay attention to because I don't think that they're serious or interesting. Like, why are two men telling women what to do with their bodies? Objections, right?
What's funny is that one starts to fall apart because apparently men can now get pregnant. So
Right.
then the objection becomes only people who can get pregnant. They have to be more clumsy about it. Only people who can get pregnant should talk about this, which then raises the question, why? That's like saying the only people that can talk about what parenting methods uh, constitute child abuse are parents, which is silly. A non-parent can easily have an opinion on that question. But they are silly, but it's important to roundly show why they're silly in an efficient way to get onto the good stuff.
Right. And I can make a phone call and get any number of women in here to say the exact same thing that
Right.
I
It
did if I really need to. Right.
wouldn't
Yeah.
change anything at all. Yeah.
Change anything at all, right? Arguments don't have gender, right?
Right.
So okay, let's move. And actually, I want you to kind of steer a little bit, Trent. You've been doing this for a while. I'm sure you have your own sense of what you feel are the best, most difficult objections. I was going to
Yeah.
steer towards the bodily autonomy type of stuff. What
Yeah,
do you
sure.
think? Should
Let's
we
talk
should we
about
head
it.
there?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Why don't you just throw out what you think is the most important one that needs to be
Yeah, I would
addressed?
say the weakest ones are just I can do whatever I want with my body.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a will to power, and that seems to be a very controversial premise. There's lots of things we can't do with our bodies.
Certainly.
And there's classic examples that are given. I like sometimes the more unclassic ones. Like if I sit on somebody's wallet on a bench at the park and they need to get their wallet back, if I said, "Well, I can do what I want with my body. I'm going to stay sitting here." no, I can't really do that. I'm using my body to prevent them from getting something they have a right to retrieve.
Mhm.
I think actually Stephen Schwartz, that's actually an analogy from him. But the more compelling argument would be that you don't have the right to do anything you want with your body, but you have the right to not donate your body to keep another person alive. You don't have to donate a kidney. You don't have to donate bone marrow to save someone else's life, to keep them alive. If you're plugged into an unconscious violinist, a la Judith Jarvis Thompson, you don't have to stay plugged in. Therefore, you should be a pregnant woman should be allowed to unplug or not donate her body to an unborn child. This is an argument by analogy. The way to show it's wrong is to point out how it's disanalogous in many
Mhm.
places, and there's a variety of ways that you can do that. And the most common ways to do that would be to say, first, in those cases, I'm not responsible for someone needing my body. But in pregnancy, people engage in an activity that is naturally ordered towards creating a person who is very helpless. So it stands to reason you do owe that individual assistance. You engage in an act ordered towards creating them. It'd be like, imagine you have the Star Trek replicator, right?
Mhm.
It can make any food you want. Let's say it can make gold bars, and you want it to make gold bars, but 10% of the time it also creates a fully formed newborn infant. And you press the button and you get the gold bars, and then there's the infant. If you just walked away and the baby died, you would be morally at fault.
Right.
Why? Because you engaged in an act that is ordered towards creating people. Now, in the case of someone needing my kidneys or my bone marrow, in those cases, I'm not the reason that they're sick. I'm not responsible for that. The other thing that will tie in here is that in refusing to donate kidneys or bone marrow, I am just choosing to not save somebody's life. It's not the case that I'm directly killing them. Abortion, they were already dying. I chose not to save them.
Mhm.
In abortion, the unborn child is not dying, despite what some pro choice advocates want to say about them. They're
Right.
perfectly healthy. Abortion is what causes them to die. It starts the fatal sequence of events, so to speak. So, and then there are others about body parts and what they're naturally ordered towards. But I think that's a good place to start. I think if I had to summarize it, I would put it this way:
Mhm.
abortion is not like refusing to donate a kidney. It is more like donating a kidney and then violently taking it back and killing the person in the process.
Mm.
Well,
Mhm.
to give you an example, here is, and even kidney donation, I would say, is not on par with pregnancy because you only have two kidneys, and a kidney is an extremely vital organ. So it's more on par with like bone marrow donation. Bone marrow donation incurs health risks. It's very painful. It can be very tiring. Uh, Imagine that, and leaves you susceptible to health risks later if you can't manufacture cells necessary for the immune system. Imagine you woke up, feel very ill. You find out somebody took a lot of your bone marrow and put it into an innocent child who is very sick, okay, and needed that bone marrow. And so they took your bone marrow out and gave it to this child, even if it's not bone marrow, even if it was a kidney. Imagine they took your kidney and you wake up and it's in a kid's body, and the kid had nothing to do with it, by the way. The parent stole your kidney. If you take the kidney back from the child, they'll die. Okay. So, and this makes it stronger for my case if it's a kidney.
Mhm.
Would it be morally justified to take your kidney back at this point? Would you, or I could ask people, would you do it?
Mhm.
I think even most people are pro choice. I think most people would not do it. And I
Right.
think many
Mhm.
people would say that it's a terrible situation to be in, but you can't kill that child to get your kidney back.
Right.
I think many people would say it would not be justified to do
Now,
that case, which
uh,
then lends itself to abortion, right?
yeah, yeah, no, I like that supplement because it seems to me that the violinist type arguments, um, the only way that the analogy doesn't completely break down is if you restrict it just to cases of rape, right?
Right. Yeah.
But what you're saying here would seem to show that we can extend the pro-life position
Even
even
yeah,
further,
because even
right? Yeah,
there, it's a non-consensual. I didn't do anything.
right.
Somebody just took my kidney. I wake up in a tub of ice like the urban legend. They took my kidney and they put it in a child's body to keep them alive. The child had nothing to do with it. It would be, it would be very difficult, but it wouldn't follow that I would have the right to kill the child
Mhm.
to get my kidney back. There could be cases where someone might take something from me, like they start taking $50 a month from my bank account to feed starving children in Africa, and I have the right to discontinue that, even though some children might die. It wouldn't follow that I've done something more immoral. But even here, I'm choosing to not save. I really do think that the killing versus letting die distinction is a huge one. The responsibility distinction is a huge one. But then also in these cases, kidneys and bone marrow are not made for other people. There's nobody else has a natural right to them.
Mm.
But the uterus seems really different. It seems more on par with mammary glands or an infant's right to breast milk if that's the only thing that will keep him alive.
Mhm.
That does not seem that the child is out of bounds to ask for. It seems that, well, here's the big problem.
Mhm.
People will say, yeah, the baby's a person, but it has a right to life, but not a right to his mother's body. To which I will ask, what do you mean that the child has a right to life? Like, what does that mean? And I think it has no meaning if it does not include the right to live in their mother's body, because that is
Right.
the only thing that they need to live. So
That's
I
right.
feel like it's an empty phrase to say, of course, they're a person. They don't have a right to life support. It treats personhood as if, it's just this magical property we have and we're all independent of everybody else. And it just means I have value, but I don't have moral claims on others. But
Mhm.
Francis Beckwith has made a good case that personhood is not just this property I have in virtue of myself. Personhood naturally entails moral claims we have upon one another in virtue of being
Right.
persons.
And
And that would
society
apply
at
to the
large.
unborn
Yeah.
and society at large. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Beckwith's work on this a lot. I also like Dr. Kazor's, his ethics of
Mm,
abortion is really
yes.
good. And he does a nice job and we should probably talk about the hard cases and stuff like that now. And
Sure.
again, we're trying to offer a deep philosophical analysis on this. And when we do that, sometimes this stuff can kind of come off as seeming a little cold or something. And that's obviously never the impression we want to get.
Right.
But one thing that Dr. Kazor does a good job reminding people of is the very unfortunate power that bad people have in virtue of being bad people. And that unfortunate power is that bad people can put good people into situations where they either have to make an absolutely heroic choice or an evil choice. Bad people have the power
Right.
to put good people into that type of situation. I don't know if you've came across that from. I'm almost certain that that's in Kazor's Ethics of Abortion at some point, but I'd just be curious your thoughts on that and how you
Yeah.
start
I think
to
I
talk
think that's
about these hard, tougher cases,
right.
right? Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Some people think that in life, we only have to choose between good and evil. And so, but the idea, and this would be called a forced option, by the way. So, in many cases, we can choose between good, evil, or no choice. So, it's like if you're on the internet, right? You could click on donating to a charity, or you could click on pornography, or you could just turn your computer off and walk away, right?
Hmm.
You can choose good, you can choose evil, or you could make no choice at all. Or we can choose between morally neutral things, Cheerios versus Raisin Bran. That's most of the choices that we make. Choosing to be a hero, it usually means we could choose there's evil over here, there's neutral, there's good, then there's heroic.
Hmm.
And not many people will choose heroic. That's what makes heroes awesome,
Yeah.
because they're a rare class.
Yeah. So, I mean, somebody puts a gun to my head and says, either you shoot your kid or I shoot you. It's a forced choice.
That's a forced choice because there's no third option of nobody gets shot.
Right.
Here, you are placed in a condition where you either must be heroic or you cooperate with evil. Now, it doesn't follow you would be gravely,
Culpable
in mortal
or,
sin or culpable. Your culpability would be
mhm.
diminished because you have been coerced, you have been forced to do this. A similar thing would be kill this stranger or I will kill your child. That
Mhm.
sounds like something from 24. I'm sure
Right.
they did use it on 24 a lot.
I'm surprised somebody hasn't done just philosophers have not done like a moral analysis podcast on every episode of 24
Oh, there
because that's
is.
all that show is. It's just ridiculous moral dilemmas.
Yeah,
Is
there
there actually
actually.
one out there? Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
Yes. There was an old series of books way back in the day. It was the Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series, and it's called 24 and Philosophy: The
How did I
World
miss
According
this?
to Jack.
Wow.
Actually, I bet you might be able to find a lot of let's see. I remember them being all, oh no, the used ones are still expensive. Not expensive. It's like $17. But I remember these series, they have all kinds of them. I'm going to bring it up here. Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture. Oh, there's a ton of them. Doctor Strange and Philosophy, the other book of forbidden knowledge. The Hobbit and Philosophy, for when you've lost your dwarves, your wizard, and your way. Iron Man and Philosophy, Facing the Stark Reality.
Hmm.
Terminator and Philosophy, I'll be back, therefore I am. So,
Hmm.
I mean, actually, yeah, you could do so much. But yeah, the point is that there's an example right there. And in the series in 24, that happened a lot. You have to bring me the detonator for the bomb, or I'm going to kill your wife and children. And then the guy, instead of calling Jack Bauer to help him, I'll just go bring him the detonator. And then the guy's
Right.
like, ha ha ha, you idiot! I'm going to
There was
kill
the
your wife
there
and
was the
children and
one
kill you.
episode where it was he had to kill that one dude, or they were going to set off the bomb. And spoiler
Yes,
alert, he killed the
he
dude.
did. Well,
Yeah.
damn it, Chloe! I don't play by rules except my
Right.
own, and even then, I don't play by them. Damn it!
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
That show was intense, no
it
doubt.
was
Uh-huh.
super intense.
Hmm.
But in these cases, you have choices between being heroic and evil, and so there you a good person must choose the heroic path, though we have compassion and empathy on someone who did not have a strong enough will to do that. But that
Right.
doesn't mean that evil became good in that circumstance.
Right. Yeah. 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 Really important to draw that out. So thanks for drawing that out. Okay, Trent, we've been going for a little bit here. What haven't we covered yet that you think is really important? And maybe we could just take a few from the audience that they've sent in. Hmm.
Um, I think we covered the gamut. There's a few other philosophical arguments here or there, but I think that these are the major ones that we've covered. I think it's important to be empathetic and listen to people. This isn't just a philosophical puzzle as much as it is a philosophical issue. It really does impact people in day-to-day lives, especially those who face an unintended pregnancy,
Right.
who don't know what they're going to do practically in that situation. So the pro-life movement must be able to meet those needs, but also be able to provide a solid intellectual foundation for our claims about the rights of the unborn.
Yeah, yeah, really good. Let's take this one here. This is from Miguel. He wants to know, what are your thoughts on issues like ectopic pregnancy? They are totally incompatible with development, can only cause some other harm. Is it morally acceptable to abort them?
Yeah, so I would say in cases, if the unborn are human beings, then if they are not human beings, it doesn't matter. Do whatever you want. But if the unborn are human beings, if they're persons, then you have a case where two people's lives are in danger. And we ask, well, what can we do if we're only able to save one of them? And I think we have a very strong moral principle we should defend, which is that you do not kill one innocent person in order to save another innocent person. So take Bob and Frank. Bob needs a new heart. Frank has a compatible heart. Bob will die in 3 months without a heart. Frank is terminally ill, but he's not going to die for another 6 months. So if nothing is done, Bob and Frank will both die. If we kill Frank, we could at least give his heart to Bob and we could save Bob. I think most people would say in that case, it's tragic, but it does not justify us killing Frank in order to save Bob. We can't do that. Now, if Bob and Frank are both drowning in a lake and maybe I only have time to reach one of them might die, but that's choosing one over saving another. Or to give it another example, poor Bob and Frank, that's total philosophy. Bob and Frank are in an
You haven't
automobile.
brought up Fido or Tibbles yet, so you're good.
Right, yeah. Bob and Frank are in a car accident and the wreckage is wrapped around them. Frank is going to die no matter what, but we could save Bob. In order to save Bob, though, we have to use the jaws of life to remove the wreckage in such a way that it will indirectly bring about Frank's death as the wreckage shifts. Now, here we might be able to justify that. We're not trying to kill Frank, we're trying to save Bob, and we're moving the wreckage around to get to Bob. And if Frank lived, that would be fine. We're not trying to kill Frank to save Bob. We're just trying to save Bob in this situation. That would be on par with saying, let's say we have Mary and her embryo, Bob, in an ectopic pregnancy. Bob cannot be saved, especially if it's an ectopic pregnancy in the fallopian tube. However, this is a damaged section of the fallopian tube that has a negative pathology for the mother. So we would be justified in removing that part of the tube. And Bob dies unintentionally. And so we remove this we remove this damaged part of Mary's body, and we have given all the care that we can to Bob in the process of this. So I would say in these cases, you can act in a way to save one life, even if it indirectly contributes to the death of someone else, but you can't directly kill one person in order to save another. There might be gray cases. We're not sure exactly what to do. Doesn't annul from the general moral principle.
Yeah, good. Got time for one or two more, Trent?
Sure. Yeah.
All right, here's Parisa. Parisa wants to know, how would you address time relative interest accounts of abortion? So I think this is tying into the future like ours type arguments.
Yeah, I would probably need a little bit more as to what the questioner is referring to. How would you address time relative interest? I guess I would need more as
Yeah,
to.
Parisa, if you're still around, ping us
Yeah, like
back
I would just need
quickly.
to know what does that mean? Does it mean that you have a forced option where like the child's going to be born in 9 months, so a decision has to be made, or certain people have a certain amount of life ahead of them or not? I would need more clarification.
Yeah, cool. John just wants to know, Trent, what is your response to evictionism?
I've heard of the term, and I understand its application. I remember reading
Pretty sure
briefly
that's in
about it.
libertarian circles, isn't it? Evictionism.
Yeah. I believe I've heard it refer to the idea that just as someone who doesn't pay their rent, if I own a property, I can kick people out of it as I want to. A woman owns her womb and can evict the child because she owns that property. Even here, I would say, even when we evict people, there are laws. You got to give them 60 days notice. Uh, we usually see the wrongness of evicting someone. There was actually a case like 100 years ago. They invited a guy over for dinner and they kicked him out of the house in a blizzard, and he went back to his house but got frostbite and he sued. And I think the court ruled that the family was responsible for that because they sent him away to negative adverse conditions for him that he would have likely sustained injury. So I would say that I don't think that it's parallel truly, especially since the child hasn't just been invited, but through a causal process has been placed into the womb where they didn't choose to be there at all. If anything, if you're going to say, if you're going to try to frame this as like a landlord evicting a tenant, it's more, if you're going to use uncharitable descriptions, it's more like kidnapping. It's more like putting someone in this situation through no fault of their own, and then saying, now I'm going to make it worse by putting you in a fatal situation by aborting you. I would say that these kinds of arguments, I don't think that they're very strong. But as I said, I'm familiar with the language and literature. I know there's a fair amount written on it. I haven't done a deep dive, but I'm already not persuaded by it.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've swam in those libertarian circles, but I remember it.
And there are
cropping up
pro-life
there, yeah.
libertarians who would agree with me, who would say, well, no, your right to liberty doesn't include the right to cause harm to innocent people.
Right. Yeah, of course. All right. Let's. Theus Brooks wants to know, how are parental obligations grounded, and what is the limit to these obligations? Trent, how do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that they're grounded in our human nature. So they're grounded in the fact that we have a right to life. And so the right to life entails the right to be left alone from fatal threats and the right to be helped along when you cannot care for yourself. An infant's right to life entails someone will care for that infant. And I would say, well, who? Who does the duty fall upon? And it seems most natural that it would fall upon those who are responsible for bringing the child into existence. So I do believe these moral obligations do come from our nature. I think they're ultimately rooted in God's commands to us, and also just in God's own nature, that we are created in God's image. We're called to be good parents, just as He is our loving parent. So the obligation is rooted in natural law and our human nature, and the limits to them. I would just say that parents have an obligation to provide their child what they need to reach an appropriate level of development, and that would include basic material needs, food, shelter, clothing, emotional needs, uh, physical needs, security, psychological needs, and spiritual needs. They
Mhm.
have an obligation to provide those basic needs through their natural abilities. So they don't have an obligation to teach calculus unless they know it, but they don't. That's not a natural thing necessarily. If your child's starving to death, you don't have an obligation to cut off your own arm and feed it to them. But I think you have an obligation to provide a child with what your body's naturally ordered towards providing them, whether it's a man whose body is ordered towards working 8 hours a day, or a woman who's ordered towards breastfeeding or gestating. I think you are obligated in those respects.
Yeah, yeah, certainly agree, and that's well articulated. Let's finish with this one because it's a practical one. Brendan wants to know, Trent, how do you make sure not to get upset when discussing this subject? Obviously, this is a very heavy subject. Sometimes people discuss it like it's an economics question. So, any practical advice here,
Yeah,
Trent?
you don't want to you don't want to make it dry like it's just economics or philosophy. But, it requires prayer and a robust spiritual life and also discipline to be able to speak about things. It's okay for us to be passionate about this issue. When I dialogue with Stephen Millies, who's a Catholic that thinks Roe v. Wade is a win, I was upset at some of the things that he said, and people could see that. So we were able to have a polite but forceful interaction. And I think that's what we should aim for when we talk to others about this issue. The way that helps also is by asking questions. The more we ask questions, the more we listen. Uh, by doing that, it lowers the temperature of the conversation, finding common ground. By doing that, it can make the interactions a lot easier.
Yeah, excellent. Trent, where can people find out more about the good work you do? Please mention your podcast and everything you're doing at Catholic Answers.
Of
And your
course,
books too. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
I would definitely recommend just check out Council of Trent on YouTube. That's on YouTube, Apple, iTunes, Google Play. Also, my website, trenthorn.com, and of course, all the good work we're doing at Catholic.com. And you can support my podcast at trenthornpodcast.com.
And please consider doing so, gentle listeners. I'll be sure to link those resources in the show notes, along with Trent's persuasive pro-life, which is just. And I think you mentioned this before we started recording, but you are working on the updated version of that,
Yeah,
right?
second
Yeah.
edition. I'm hoping to have it out probably by the end of the year.
Awesome. So keep an eye out for that, and please do, gentle listeners, share this episode and help us continue this conversation. As we know, it's always important, but now it's increasingly important doing to various timings of things. So, Trent, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.